Hi, my name is Brendan Rocky, and I am co-owner of Rocky Farms in Center, Colorado, sitting at an elevation of 7,600 feet. Thank you for joining me today as I take you on a virtual tour of Rocky Farms. I am the third generation to farm this land, and maintaining the health of the land and the people has always been a major priority. So thank you for giving me this opportunity today to share our story. Here on Rocky Farms, we grow specialty potatoes, meaning we like potatoes that are just a little bit different. We raise many varieties of reds, yellows, purples, and fingerlings. This all began with the desire to raise potatoes that have a little more flavor than a standard russet. The only other cash crop we raise is quinoa, which is a pseudo cereal that originated in the Andean region of South America. This is grown in rotation with the potatoes wherever cover crops are not present. Our annual precipitation here is less than 6 inches, which technically makes us a desert. Therefore, irrigation is absolutely necessary to grow crops here. Most of the irrigation here is done with center pivot sprinklers, which actually gives us quite a bit of control and can help produce a high quality crop. The water that is pumped through the sprinklers comes from an aquifer that sits beneath us. However, a reduction in spring runoff from the snow-packed mountains west of us and mismanagement of this valuable resource has led to a depleted aquifer, which is now at a level that threatens the long-term sustainability of agriculture in this high mountain desert. So water conservation is a major contributing factor when I am making management decisions on my farm. We raise potatoes for a couple different reasons. First off, we raise some potatoes for the fresh market, and the fingerlings are the largest acreage for us in this category. Most of what we sell on fingerlings goes towards the food service industry, so our product ends up on the plates in fancy restaurants. This is one reason we put such an emphasis on quality. We get rewarded economically for producing a crop that looks flawless. The other part of our business is growing certified seed potatoes, which means we are growing the potatoes that other people will plant. Potato crops are not grown from actual seed, so when a potato crop is planted, the tubers themselves go in the ground, and it is very difficult to raise a potato crop without clean seed potatoes to plant. We have a few different outlets for these seed potatoes. We supply many seed catalogs with product, and we supply seed to hundreds of small farms across the country, from Maine to California. The majority of our seed potatoes are packaged in 50-pound bags, which keep us busy all winter long. The very first step of raising certified seed potatoes is actually growing plants from tissue culture in a greenhouse to produce mini tubers. We will raise 3 greenhouse crops a year, which produces enough mini tubers to maintain our low generation seed production. Just because we are raising certified seed does not mean our crops are free of disease, but what it does mean is that we have met certain disease tolerances in order to maintain our certification status. This requires several field inspections during the growing season for verification. Cover crops are a very important part of my operation. Initially, I pursued cover crops simply for water conservation. They use significantly less water than any of the cash crops that are grown here, so I thought if I could save water while improving the health of my soil, this would be a good thing. At first, I started with monoculture cover crops, but when I was introduced to multi-species cover crops is when everything started to come together. The year after planting my first diverse cover crop was the largest leap forward my soil ever took in one season, and now plant diversity has become an essential component on every single acre I farm. Plant diversity is so important to maintaining a functional soil because every plant in that mix is doing something different for me. Each species has a different relationship with the soil, but one thing I focus on the most is how these living plants accelerate carbon cycling. What this means is the plants do a great job taking carbon from the atmosphere and adding it to the soil either through root exudates or through plant residue. All living things need carbon, and the atmosphere is loaded with carbon, but it's in a form that can only be accessed by plants. All other life must rely on plants to put this carbon in a different form through the process of photosynthesis before it can be utilized. Once this carbon is accessed, respiration takes place, returning the carbon to the atmosphere, thereby completing the carbon cycle. Carbon must stay in motion in order to support life. With the exception of an occasional turnip, cover crops aren't really intended to directly feed people. So the main focus at first with cover crops was to feed the life in the soil, but there was still something missing. Recently, I started working with a local rancher to get his livestock out on my cover crops. The presence of yet another living thing on my soils has further advanced the health of my soil even further. Although the cattle aren't actually adding fertility to my soils, since what they are feeding on was grown from that soil, they still do a great job cycling the nutrients that are out there, and they are stimulating life in the soil even further. Adding livestock to an operation does not automatically improve soil health. In fact, if the herd is mismanaged, they can actually do some damage. One of the biggest challenges with introducing livestock was finding a way to manage them in a way that met both my needs and the needs of the rancher. We've been able to work together in a way that allows us to cycle the cattle around the field in paddocks. I don't want the livestock on any piece of ground for too long, but yet I want them there long enough that they are completely grazing the crop, including the weeds. This relationship has also had an economic incentive for our farm. The rancher pays me pasture rent to have his cattle out here, so I can use this to offset the expenses of growing the cover crop, which I was going to grow anyways. Just like I like having diversity in my plants, I also like having diversity in the livestock as well. So we've also been working with the same rancher to bring sheep onto other parts of our farm. The sheep have actually been a little bit easier to manage because instead of setting up paddocks with a hot wire around the fields, we just bring in a sheep herder with some dogs to manage that herd for us. Everything that I have talked about so far is done in order to set myself up for a successful potato crop the next year. By the time I put a seed piece in the ground, I already have the majority of my fertility established for the year. A compost application, which is amended with a fish and soybean meal, is applied right after the livestock are done grazing my cover crops the year before. By making sure that all my fertility is in an organic form, meaning it is carbon-based, has had long-term impacts. Since the fertility is carbon-based, it is not susceptible to leaching or volatilization, and I have been able to reduce the volume of my applications over time, making my production model more economic. I no longer rely on synthetic fertilizers to raise my crop. When I plant my potatoes, this isn't the only seed I am putting in the ground. I like plant diversity in my potatoes for the same reasons I like it in my cover crops. I plant companion crops with my potatoes so they can help the potatoes meet their full potential. In order to plant these companion crops, I did have to modify my potato planter so I can plant 15 pounds per acre of a companion crop mix while I am planting my potatoes. The mix is composed of 5 different species. At first, I was not sure if the companion crop seed would come up from the depth that my seed potatoes are planted, but they can easily emerge from 6 inches deep. In fact, they usually emerge before the potatoes do. The species I have chosen complement the potato crop and never compete with the potatoes for resources. This is one of the biggest shifts in mindset that must take place when introducing companion crops. Not all plants compete with each other. Of the 5 species in my companion crop mix, 4 of them are legumes. Potatoes have a high demand for nitrogen, and legumes have the ability to take nitrogen from the atmosphere and add it to the soil. Legumes have always been present in my cover crop mixes in rotation with my potatoes, but I decided I didn't want to limit myself to every other year. Having legumes in my soil every single year is another reason I have been able to reduce my fertility inputs. Every time I can do this, my profit margin increases. Nitrogen fixation is definitely the focus when talking about legumes as companions, but plant diversity in general does so much to improve the health of the soil and the crops. Buckwheat is the only species in my companion mix that isn't a legume, but that doesn't mean it isn't impacting the fertility of my soil. Buckwheat does a tremendous job mobilizing phosphorus. This is especially helpful in our calcareous soils, where potatoes can't always access the phosphorus that is out there. I also like buckwheat in my potatoes because the flowers provide a great food source for predatory insects like this lady beetle. When I have a potato growing in a highly fertile soil, that has good soil structure, I tend to have a consistent crop that is free of stress and not impacted by disease. Everything just seems to function better, even the relationship between the soil and water. Soil structure and aggregate stability are often talked about, but it seems like it is usually in reference to water. Now, this has been an improvement we have seen for sure. I have a higher water infiltration rate, allowing me to apply less water at each irrigation, and I also have a higher water holding capacity, allowing me to go longer in between irrigations. A noticeable water use reduction has been documented. This doesn't mean the crop suddenly needs less water, it just means it is using the water in the soil more efficiently. I think we can all agree that soil structure has a positive impact on water use, but I don't think enough emphasis is put on gas exchange. When a soil has a stable aggregate, it keeps pores open for water penetration, but the ability of the soil to breathe is very important as well. Most of the fungal and bacterial diseases that affect potatoes are anaerobic, meaning they can only survive in the absence of oxygen. When a soil lacks structure, this environment is easily achieved. Allowing for good gas exchange through an aggregated soil is a great way to allow the soil to release carbon dioxide as the result of respiration and allow oxygen to penetrate deep into the soil, keeping disease in check. And this can even happen when the soil is completely saturated. Potato flowers are always present in potato fields, but they are only present for a short time and have very little impact on insect diversity. By adding companion crops that flower, I have improved this situation, but it still wasn't enough to satisfy me. I started planting diverse flowering strips in my potato field to give my beneficial insect populations a boost. This is especially critical when raising certified seed potatoes. The most troublesome diseases I deal with in certified seed are viruses, and viruses are spread from infected plants to healthy plants by many different species of aphid. In a monoculture of potatoes, there is nothing for these beneficial insects to feed on, so I had to change this environment by integrating plants that produce large amounts of pollen, nectar, and extra floral nectar. Having diversity is key as well, so I can ensure that something is always in bloom. The different architecture of the plant is helpful too, creating lots of different habitats for the insects to reproduce. The more different species of insects I can establish in my field reduces the chance of any pest insect coming in and completely dominating the area. Continuing to raise disease-free seed potatoes is a great testament to the value of plant and insect diversity. Not only do my fields look different, they also sound different. Potato production does not rely on pollination since the crop is entirely vegetative, but the presence of multiple species of bees in my fields is something that you will not find in most potato fields. Even though the presence of these bees does not have any direct economic impact on me, I do find comfort in knowing that my fields provide safe refuge for them. Now that you know more about my operation, I know the big question is, am I regenerative? According to most of the definitions I have seen, I would say yes, but there are so many differing opinions out there, some people might disagree, and that's why I really don't like the word, and you will never hear me use it when discussing my farm. I don't farm this way because I care about a label. I do it because I choose to, and the practices have their own built-in incentives. Here is a great example. My neighbor also raises certified seed. Our farms are only separated by a ditch, but our farming practices couldn't be more different. Yet our end goal is identical. We both want to grow clean seed. He chooses to manage his aphid populations by applying crop oils and insecticides to a monoculture potato field. I choose to integrate plant diversity so beneficial insects can manage the aphid for me. We both must manage our aphid populations, but we have a choice on how to do so. I know he spends a lot more on the crop oils and insecticides than I do on diverse seed mixes, but we are both quite successful at what we do. Everybody thinks I should get paid more for my seed if I throw the word regenerative on the bag, and it's a great concept, but this is a competitive field and I don't have any customers that are going to pay me more for a new label. However, I can demand a premium and ensure return customers by consistently providing them with high quality products. This is where my economic advantage really comes into play. I choose to invest in my soil. In return, I have managed to maintain yields while drastically reducing my cost of production, and the quality of my crop has improved. Many soil-borne pathogens can affect the aesthetics of a potato crop, and this is even more important in a specialty potato crop like fingerling potatoes. So when I take a load of our potatoes to a warehouse, I have a larger percentage of sellable crop. Too often we are worried about harvested yield, but I want to focus more on sellable yield. If I harvest a large quantity of unhealthy potatoes, this is going to affect my bottom line. Sellable yield is more important to me when we talk about profit margin. Since I'm raising potatoes in a healthy soil, the health of the tubers has improved as well. This means the crop stores better, giving me a longer season in which to sell my crop. All of these things really add up in the long run. Many of our potatoes travel a long distance before they end up at their final destination. The further the potato travels, the harder it is to share our story. We would all like to think that a patron in a restaurant in California would like to know how the potatoes he is eating were grown. And even if they do care at some level, finding one that would like to pay more for that potato is even more difficult. Specialty produce is a competitive field, and if we sit on our crop until every customer is willing to pay more for our farming practices, we will end up with a lot of unsold product at the end of the day. So if I'm going to make more money farming this way, it's going to be because the farming practices themselves are more economic. Now, as we get closer to home, we do have a loyal customer base very close to us that is willing to pay a little bit more for our farming practices. It helps when they can drive by and see the flower strips in the field, and they can talk to us face to face, and they truly do appreciate how we are farming. In conclusion, there are a few points that I really want to emphasize before you go. These are the things I want you to remember about Rocky Farms. Removing the use of toxic chemicals was the catalyst for our initial changes. The generation before me was tired of exposing themselves and their customers to toxic chemicals. So we had to make some drastic changes to where we were no longer dependent on these inputs. Water is scarce here. Every decision I make takes into account how much water must be used. If water was not a limiting factor, I would be able to do so much more in my short growing season, but I do not have an endless supply, so I must use it wisely. Synthetic fertilizers were a trap we fell into, much like most of agriculture. It came with short-term promises and no consideration for the long-term impact. Synthetic fertilizers do a great job destroying life in the soil, contaminating groundwater, and creating a plant that is susceptible to other problems. Removing it from my system has had nothing but positive results. If I could summarize my current farming practices with one word, it would be life. The more diverse life I can bring into my system, the better everything functions, which makes sense at the end of the day since ultimately the reason we farm is to sustain life. Diversity is essential to farming the way I do, whether it be plant, insect, or even soil microbes. I feel that monocultures are devastating to modern agriculture, and I do feel that we could solve most of the problems in agriculture with diversity. If I can't make money farming this way, I won't be able to do it for very long. I get frustrated when people tell me that they need an outside economic incentive to pursue any of these practices. These farming practices have their own built-in economic incentives. With everything you have heard today, I can tell you with confidence that I am now raising the highest quality crop ever produced on this farm, and this benefits every single person involved down to the consumer. Thank you for your attention today. I hope this video gives everybody hope that there are better ways to farm. If you would like to watch this video again, I will post it on my website. Thanks again on behalf of Rocky Farms.